We're going to go ahead and we're going to build one more 3-column layout example. This one's going to be a little bit different than the other ones that we were working on before because we're going to be using float and clear to create this web page. This example web page basically is going to use 5 visual elements: a header, 3 columns, and a footer. And this is a very common layout that you'll probably find as a useful starting point for many web pages that you'll build. The structure is very simple, but it can be the foundation of a very complex and beautifully designed web page. What we're going to do here is we're going to float 3 columns side by side underneath a header and then have a footer run across the bottom. So if we look at our web page, this is what it looks like without any formatting. It's a very simple layout. It has an H1 tag, several paragraphs, and that's pretty much it. My paragraphs are already wrapped inside of some divs, so let's just take a look at the body section of the web page. You can see that here is my header, and I've wrapped it in a div called header. I basically have created 3 columns. Column 1, which wraps around the first paragraph, column 2, which wraps around several more paragraphs, and column 3, which wraps around this next paragraph right here. Now I do have another div that I'm using in this example. It's called content area, and this will become more clear as we go on. The content area basically wraps these 3 internal divs, so you'll see how this is going to come into play as we build the web page. The final item is that I have a div that surrounds my footer, and of course these things are all invisible right now since we haven't styled them in any way. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to add some styles to start off with. We'll be using styles that we've already used in many web pages, so I'm not going to go about typing them. I'm just going to go ahead and paste them onto my page. I have margin and padding set to 0. I've set a font and a font size for my body. I have some padding on my paragraph and on my H1. So if we save and we refresh the page, this is what we have so far. Alright, so now let's go ahead and let's create some styles for some of the divs. So I'm going to start off by styling my header div, and we'll go ahead and make a tag for that. I'm going to go ahead and set the width, the specific width of this div, and I'm going to be using 600 pixels for this example so it'll fit nicely on my page. I'm also going to set the background color, and the color that I'm going to be using is going to be a teal blue. I'm going to set the color of my text so that it doesn't just get lost in that darker background. And I'm going to go ahead and text align my text to be center. Since this is the header, I want the information to be more readily available. So this is kind of similar on what we did before. Because my div has a fixed width, I'm not making a fluid layout, I'm actually going to make a fixed layout here. You can see that the background color only extends partially across the page. That's basically 600 pixels, across the page. So now let's go ahead and let's style the additional columns that we have. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to style column 1 next. Let's just scroll up a little bit here. So I'm going to put hash column 1, and what we'll do in column 1 is we're going to go ahead and we're going to float all our columns to the left to create the multi-column layout. So I'm going to do a float, and we will be using a float of left. And let's go ahead and let's set the width of this. I'm going to set it to 150 pixels. If I can spell it right, that would be helpful. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to turn on a border so that we can see where these things are. This will be helpful as we kind of delve into building this web page so you can kind of see what's going on. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn on a border color, and I've made it 2 pixels. So if we save the page and refresh, you can see that this is what I'm getting. So this column is now floating to the left and it has a little green border around it. That's all I've basically done. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a similar style for my remaining 2 columns. So I'll just actually copy this style and then I'll modify it. So column 2 is going to also float left. This one is going to have a larger width though. We'll do 600 pixels here. And instead of doing a border, let's just set a background color. And I'm just going to use something neutral like a light gray. And that's all we'll do on this one. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up my style for column 3. Column 3 is actually going to be exactly like column 1. It's going to float left, a width of 150, and I'll use the same color border. So if we refresh the page now, you can see what happens. Here's my first column, here's my second column, third column, and then this is my footer, and my footer is getting pushed out. You can also see how these, even though I assign this a width of 150, 300, and 150, which should equal 600, it's being pushed out a little bit. Remember, our borders are going to add 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. So this is an 8 additional pixels, and we'll fix that as we proceed through our web page. So let's go ahead and let's add some padding on some of these things, because it's going to be kind of hard if all of my text in my columns is so slammed together. We'll go ahead and we'll come up to column 1. We'll add in some padding. I'm going to go ahead and add padding, and we'll go ahead and add padding on the top of 10 pixels. I'm going to go ahead and add padding on the right of 10 pixels. And I don't want any padding on the bottom, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave the padding on the bottom at 0. And then I'm going to go ahead and add padding on the left of 10 pixels. And let's go ahead and save and see how that looks for us. Okay, so you can see I have a little more room. Now my columns are getting pushed out even more. So let's go ahead and let's subtract the information to make this column kind of work. Basically, I've added 4 pixels for my right and left border, because I have 2 pixels on each side, so that's 4. And I've added padding on both the right and the left side of 10 each, so that's 20. So I basically have 24 pixels that I want to subtract from my 150. So if I was to subtract 24, I should get 126. So if I save and refresh, this column is going to take up 150 pixels, but you can see that because, you know, padding is on the inside, so I have to add that, and I have to add the borders in. This is the numbers that I'm going to need to use. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy this whole style, and we're going to apply the exact same thing to column 3. So I could have actually just written this declaration together, like column 1, comma, column 3, but I put them separate, so I'm just going to keep it that way. I'll reload my page, and now you can see that the edge of this border is flush with our 600 pixel header. So that's definitely working the way we want. Let's go ahead and let's take care of that footer, which is kind of just like floating off into space right there. So let's go ahead and let's add a style for our footer. I'm going to go ahead and add in the style for my footer. And on the footer, what we'll do is we'll add a background color, just so we can really visualize what's going on. And we'll use our same color that we used on the header. Let's go ahead and let's add a width. And I'm going to go ahead and make the text a lighter color so that we can read it a little bit better. And we'll just use FFF, which is white. I need to have a semicolon here so that this all works. If we refresh the page, you can see this is what it looks like. Now you can see how it's actually made this whole area blue, and that's because the footer by default is wanting to basically get, because these items are all floated items are technically ignored, it's going to try to push as close as it can up to the header element. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to clear the footer. We're going to have it clear left, and by clearing left, what that's going to do is that's going to go ahead and allow the footer to drop down below. So let's just go ahead and do a clear left, and we'll save, and we'll see how this affects our layout. You can see that now my footer comes to the bottom of the page, which is exactly where I want it to be. So that is definitely starting to work a little bit better. Now if this particular layout, if I, I could be done right here. I mean, I turned on the borders in the background so you could see where each of the divs were actually, being placed. But let's say using this same layout, I would actually like to have some sort of color appear, and I want to create a layout that's flexible. Like, I don't really want to assign a height value because it might be that this column becomes longer than this column and then it's going to push down. How this web page is set up right now, I can actually go and I can select any of the content. So if I grab a bunch of this paragraph text, I'll grab this paragraph right here. If I cut that from column 2, and let's say I just put it back up here in column 1 and I save my page, you can see if I refresh, the page is still going to work correctly. It's just that the column 1 is now the column that's going to push everything down, and you can see where everything kind of ends like so. So let's go ahead and let's undo that. So I'm just doing undo, and I'll resave to get back to our initial layout that we were actually using. But I'm going to show you the purpose of having my container, my content area div, which, remember, we discussed that at the beginning. It wraps all of the column divs right here. So here's my content area div. Let's go ahead and let's assign a style for content area, which is going to go ahead and I'm going to put a background color in that so you can see a little bit different method of achieving what we're going to do here. I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to make a style for content area. And the content area style is going to be fairly simple. I'm going to go ahead and assign it a width of 600 pixels, that's the numbers that I'm using. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set the background color as well. And we're going to go ahead and use a color that is different so that we can actually see what's going on here. So I'm going to use FFE077, which is a yellow, so it'll be nice and bright. If I reload my page now, whoops, what did I forget? Width, background color, did I spell my content area right? Content. Oh, that should have done the trick. We should have colorized this. Oh, you know what, actually, we're not going to see that right now. Let me put a border on it really quick. We need to do one other thing, and I'll explain why we don't see that right now. Let's go ahead and let's throw a border on this temporarily. So I'm going to go ahead and set the border, and let's use a border of 5 pixels. We'll go ahead and we'll use a solid border, and just to illustrate this, I'm going to go ahead and use black. So if I save and refresh the page now, you can actually see where my content area div is residing. It is here. It's pushed up. It's basically enclosing these 3 columns, but it's not containing them. And the reason that it's not containing them is because this content area div is basically wrapping around something that only contains floated items. So even though there's content in it, it doesn't actually recognize it. It basically is going to behave as if it's empty, which isn't what we want. So we need to make this box open up and surround the columns. You need to remember, when you have a div that only contains floated elements, it's going to behave as if it's an empty div. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of content to our HTML down here to make sure that this div is not empty. So I will go ahead and I'm just going to add a div right before my closing div for my content area tag. I'm going to go ahead and add another div into my web page. I'm going to assign a class to it, and I'm going to call my class clear. And basically I need to put something in this div. Divs don't like to be empty. If you don't have any content for a div, you can simply put, what I'm going to put inside is a comment, or some people will put something and then they'll turn the behavior to be hidden or something like that. But you need to basically it's important to put something in there. You could put a non-breaking space in there. You could just put a period in there, or something that would not be very noticeable. I find the comment to be very useful because I don't have to, comment's not taking up any space. So now, if I save and refresh, nothing's going to happen on our page yet, because what I really need to do is I need to assign some sort of style to the class div that we've just made. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to come up here to my code, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a style class that I just created called clear. So I'm going to go ahead and type clear, and what I want to do is I just want to clear the floats. So I'm just going to go ahead and use clear, and I want to clear, I'm just going to clear both, even though I could clear left and this would work too because I'm only floating left, but I'll just clear both. Usually when I make a style, a class called clear, I can use this many times in my web page to clear content that is, next to a floated div. So I usually just make it clear both, so then if I have to use it on right or left floated items, it will work. Now you can see the content area div and how it's surrounding the rest of our web page right here. So this is very helpful. I'm going to get rid of the border on that content div because we don't need that anymore since we can actually see the yellow background. I'll save this and we'll refresh our page, and you can now see I have a nice 3-column layout. You could go ahead, like let's say I wanted to have this first column have a different color and go all the way down. Well, you can see where this first column ends. It's never going to go down to the bottom of this page and be equal to this column right here. But what I could do is in my content area div, I could assign a background image that repeats, that would create the illusion of this column being extended down with some sort of color. And we'll get into that a little bit later on when we start to work with background images, but I just wanted to mention that. So this one is a little more complex than some of the other examples that we used. It's a great starting point for using floats to create a multi-column web page.